Good evening, everyone. My name's Ian, and I'm from Pendennis Good News Church. And I'd like to share with you a few thoughts from what I think is the most well-known story in the Old Testament, the story of David and Goliath. Now, before you go reaching to the off button, bear with me for a few moments, because I think the story has got something to say to us, both as church and nation, in the light of COVID and what's happening as a result. When we look at Genesis through to Revelation, we can interpret the biblical accounts as a story of the battle between the kingdom of darkness against the kingdom of light. And we see obviously and clearly from the scriptures that the Lord Jesus wins that battle supremely at the cross. As we look at this chapter here, chapter 17 of 1 Samuel, we see an expression of that kingdom of darkness fighting against the kingdom of light. The Philistines are the arch enemies of the people of God, the Israelites. And so at the beginning of the chapter, they encroach upon the land of the people of God, the Israelites, and they come spoiling for a fight. They're looking to antagonize the people of Israel, and they prompt them to a battle. And they have a giant, they have a champion, Goliath, who stands 9 feet tall and replete with heavy armor. He calls out to the people of Israel, calling for their champion, so that as they fight together, that they would resolve the issues between the two nations. And as he issues his challenge, so he issues it with taunts and despisings and rejections of the people of God. What is striking as we look at verse 11, we see the response of the people of God. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. There is fear. There is silence in response to those challenges. And what is important for us to note here is that Saul is included in that fear and that terror. Who is Saul? Saul was the king whom the people of Israel wanted to appoint. They said, we want to be like all the other nations and have a king. And so Saul, who was head and shoulders over everyone else, he was appointed to be king. And so instead of stepping on to the battlefield and fighting for the people of Israel, Saul is seemingly impotent and unable to respond to that challenge. What's striking as we read this passage is that Saul and the people of Israel have not called upon God. There is no sense of them looking to God for his enabling and his leading and his direction. There's silence. And as we look at that situation, we see that it represents how the people of God can respond to the giants, the difficulties, the challenges by trusting in their own strength. There is no recognition of their need of God's help. And so in and of themselves, they are unable to respond. And yet, as we look at verse 12, we see David is introduced. And David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse. And as we know from the rest of the story, David is empowered by God to bring about a great victory over Goliath. Now, how was he able to do that? It wasn't because he was a battle-hardened warrior like Goliath was. He was a young man compared to the mature man that Goliath was. How was he able to do it? Because he had trust and confidence in the Lord, and he used something that the world would have described as useless, some stones and a sling, to bring about that victory. As we look at David, representing the Israelites and winning the victory, it prompts us to think about the Lord Jesus, who stepped onto the battlefield with the enemies of death, of Satan, sin, and won that victory. How did he win victory? Through physical strength? No, through weakness, the weakness of the death on the cross. And as a result of that, what do we find through that weakness of giving himself to death in order that we might have life? It means that today, as we face those challenges, there is hope because the Lord Jesus has triumphed. Even as David represented the people of Israel and they enjoyed the fruits of that victory, as we see right at the end of the story, so then the children of God, because of the victory of the Lord Jesus, their representative, they can have confidence about the future, whether it's death, whether it's fears, whether it's challenges. The child of God has hope because his representative, who is on the battlefield, has won that victory. He has triumphed, and he enables us and empowers us today to walk in the light and in the power of that victory for the glory of the one who loved us and gave himself for us. May the Lord help and encourage us today to enjoy that victory and to live it for the praise of his name.